Okay, welcome to our shorts listeners and those of you who hear us. I have a very special guest with me today, whom I'll introduce in a minute. For those of you who follow us regularly, you'll know that shorts is a series of quick conversations with senior industry experts, and the idea is to get perspectives in different areas of talent management. Yeah. And many of you have been sort of following us quite regularly. We've been getting some very good feedback, which is useful. Also keep feeding us back with what other topics would you like to sort of listen to. Okay, so let me introduce my guest today, Bala Murali Raghavan. So Bala, as he's called fondly, he's had very deep experience in the technology industry with Motorola and Nokia later, and he was in a global role heading up the Nokia Care Academy for many years, and then now for the last few years he's focusing himself on digital transformation and specifically around manpower and people transformation and learning. So Bala, welcome to the Shorts event.
Hi, Bimal. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be meeting up with you, and thank you for inviting me for this session.
Oh, great. Okay, so let's launch straight into this thing. So Bala, since you are an expert in this whole area of what I would broadly call digital manpower transformation, if I may, and learning, what are the top 3-4 trends you are seeing, which I think in organizations we should be aware of?
I will start by saying that again, I'm from an OD perspective. I've seen that the key trends as we move along, digital transformation is nothing new. It has been there, but it's taking a more of a business process improvement kind of approach. So the key trends is now with us moving towards future of hybrid work.
Right.
There is a need for ensuring that organizations are able to reach out and engage learners, employees in terms of learning in a few aspects itself. It's not just in the workplace, but at home, but in mobility itself. So that's one of the key trends. Is the challenge is in terms of being able to do that. Second is with the acceleration of digitization that's taking place. And we are in the industry 4.0. One of the key things that is actually happening is where it's now easier for organizations to push digital learning or digital engagement. So the use of digital technology, or we call it HR tech tools, is being accelerated. So that's the second thing itself. Third, one of the key things is mindset change. So one of the key aspects is digital literacy and the mindset change of learners to be able to be adaptable and using digital tools and technologies for learning engagement. So these are some of the 3 trends that I'm seeing that shifting the way learning is actually happening in organizations.
Right. So Bala, let me pick them one by one, but I want to talk a little bit about the last one you mentioned, which is actually you mentioned 2 things there, which is one is the people getting more comfortable with using digital tools and technologies, but also you spoke about this mindset thing. So can you talk a little bit more about this whole issue of how the mindset is shifting?
Yeah, again, I would go back a bit in terms of before COVID-19. Whenever I talk to organizations in terms of digital transformation of the workforce or the workplace itself, the mindset has been, yeah, it's good. We are in the digital age, but we are comfortable. The way learning happens, the learning engagement happens to the employees, even from an HR perspective, it's fine, it's doable. Then COVID came, and you all of us know, what caused this whole digital transformation. It wasn't a CTO or CEO, but it's COVID. Right. And there was a sense of urgency and the disruption caused that. So organizations were able to do that, but it was out of necessity itself to do that. So right now, the key thing is for them to understand digitization has changed, but it's not being adapted the way or to the level that we want it as much as possible. Right. So the key thing that's happening right now is, yes, they understand it, but the fear of moving full on digitalization is taking place. The other thing that I would cover on is in terms of the whole growth mindset. Right. When we talk about the workforce itself, again, it's a bit from the learning side, but one of the key things that's actually happening is organizations are still saying that the growth mindset is still not there. It depends on the organization, the culture, So that is causing a kind of a twofold approach. There are the organizations and employees who would want and are forward thinking and are moving towards adopting digital learning and technologies, whereas the others are doing a wait and see. As much as possible, I'm fine with the current way of learning that's happening and engagement.
Right, right. So tell me, since you mentioned this, is this also related to age or industry, or are you seeing this phenomena, let's say, that in any industry or at any age, there are some who are more forward looking and there are some who are quote unquote comfortable?
Yes. There was, I mean, again, I would used to be where we say, if you're a millennial, you are a digital native itself. So you talk about in terms of, it's basically everything's using digital tools and technologies, but not necessarily the case. It has to do with the demographic, where you are from, your culture, your values, and whether you're a developed nation or you're a developing nation itself. So it depends on that and the usage itself. So it's in by and large, in a developed market, where you have an organization or an organizations that's thriving in the technology industry itself, the shift towards using digital tools is higher and technology. Whereas where the digital mindset of a company that's been traditional brick and mortar also, the pickup is a bit slower. And that's across industries. So I wouldn't pinpoint and say that it has to do with a specific demographic. It might be gravitating towards that, but it's not precisely the case.
Okay. So if you talk about, let's say, the people who are quote unquote, or leaders who are, and I'm using the word leaders very specifically, who are comfortable saying, maybe we don't need to move all that quickly, kind of a thing. What would you say to them, in terms of advice, saying, we are seeing these trends. What are the 2-3 things you should carefully look at?
I would say first and foremost, it's no more a disruption. We are in a post-COVID-19 era, so to speak. And digitalization is here to stay. And if you talk about right now in the news and so on, we talk about future of hybrid work. From an HR perspective, it is going to be that. So it becomes more of a necessity. So as a leaders, they need to accept the fact and recognize that you need to ensure that you're able to manage and lead an organization that's slightly more hybrid in the way. Second, I would say is in terms of forward thinking as a mindset has to be in play with the organizations, with the employees. So as a leader, and one of the key things I would say, they need to walk the talk. There are leaders who support, who drive it, but when you see the behaviors in terms of using digital tools and technologies, it's not to the level. It can also has to do with their readiness in using digital tools and technologies on a day-to-day basis. And also the scope of use. They might be using in terms of the tools like emails and all those things, or even social media, but you need to move beyond that. How do you use digital tools and technologies in engaging the employees on a day-to-day basis itself, on the go? They might not be comfortable, but they need to build that kind of behavior within them.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point you raised. So, Bala, let me move to another, slightly parallel sort of a point which you mentioned a couple of times, which is around this whole hybrid working. And obviously, companies are still trying to figure out what's the right model or models, if you will. And I think most companies and leaders are still, in what I would like to call a discovery phase rather than a solution phase kind of a thing. What's been your experience so far as to, how are companies sort of coping with this whole, completely significantly big shift, if you will, into this whole hybrid world?
Yeah. So, Bimal, here, one of the key things is, when I talk to companies itself, there's 2 schools of thoughts. One is where they say, yes, they accept the fact hybrid work is here to stay. So we need to manage that. So it's a more of how do you manage the workforce and what does that actually mean? And whereas on the other hand, there are organizations which still feels where they need to be back in the workplace. It also has to do with the industry and the type of work. If it's operational, the tendency is operational, they need to be physically in the workplace itself. But this is where I go back and I say, hey, so how did you actually, overcome this during the pandemic when there was a lockdown? There was a way to do that. It's not that you cannot, you can. It's just a matter of ease of going back to the normal way of doing things itself, the tendency to move that. So the key thing is those who have been used to, they see that there is a gain for the organization by moving toward a hybrid workplace. They would drive towards it. Whereas on the other side of things, if it's a high cost or the return of investment of moving to a hybrid workplace is not there, they would default back to what it used to be. So there's two schools of thoughts itself. And the other question where you asked is in terms of, when you say, it's still fluid. Everyone's still trying to figure out what does that actually mean? What does hybrid work actually mean? What does it mean for the organization? What does it mean for the workforce? And how do you go about doing it? So it is still in discovery phase itself. That nobody has an answer to it, or nobody has. It will take some time to evolve to figure out. But one of the things I would say, digitization is helping in that transformation process.
Do you, Bala, you work with a range of industries and companies, right? So what are the early metrics in this space people are tracking? So if I were to look at, how effective, if I were to ask the question as a leader, how effective is, my model of hybrid working? What are the early metrics people are starting to track, at least, even though there are no clear answers?
Interestingly, it varies, but the first one that they look at in a hybrid work, are my employees' productivity improving when they're working from home itself? So they're still trying to figure out, but when they measure productivity in some organizations, the productivity is measured in terms of time in front of a computer.
Right.
So are they actually spending time in front of the computer? Whether they're productive, whether they're performing, there's value out. It is being measured. But the first thing is, are they actually 9 to 5? Are they in front of the computer? Are they actually working? So one of the things they're trying to get their head around is, how do I measure that? How do I make sure? So there are technologies where you can actually you can measure using keystrokes, and so on itself. So that's one of the things. How do I know that? How do I know that they're working? That brings us to a different whole discussion on trust and sense making and all those things, which I'll pause right now.
Correct. Yeah. But I think, it's interesting because somebody else I was having a conversation with was talking about this, that maybe one of the things which will happen as a consequence of this, significant shift will be that our meaning of what is productivity will change. And, rather than going back to the industrial engineering era, maybe we will start discovering a new meaning for what does productivity really mean, particularly with all the digitalization and all that and automation and stuff like that. Because I think a lot of people are still struggling with, if I may call it that, the original definition of productivity, which is that, are you physically present in a way? And the assumption that if you are physically present, there is a direct link to productivity, but that may not be true in the modern world, so to say, particularly for knowledge workers, So I don't know whether you've heard stories around that yet, kind of a thing. I'm sure you do have a lot of stories around that.
Yes, one of the things, if you see the shift, has been performance-based outcome. So at the end of the day, it's more about performance in terms of the value, the output that you provide. So whether you're working 9 to 5, whether you're working from home, you're working from the office itself, at the end of the day, has that performance been received, the outcome has been in place itself. So there's a shift in terms of organizations understanding what does it actually mean, the managers, the leaders understanding what does it mean, how do they translate that to the employees, the workforce, and the workforce or the employee's role is basically then to ensure that, yes, the performance is there, the output is there. It's not how I get it done. I get it done at the end of the day itself. So that's the shift that has to take place itself. And that's why I always come back and I say it always comes back to trust. Organizations then now need to trust the employees, the way of working, that at the end of the day, output happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an important one you raise, Bala. And I want to go back before I come back to trust. Let me go back to you mentioned growth mindset, and I just want you to maybe give us a couple of examples of stories around what kind of conversations are you seeing in that space.
It varies again from if you talk about in terms of frontline workers, all the way to even leadership itself. So it's for frontline workers, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that they realize that they have not, if they do not adapt and upskill themselves, they would see that the job is not that. It's not the organization is not enabling them to continue to work. It's their job is redesigned. The skill sets that's required is different. So if you have the growth mindset, you want to pick up new skill sets and so on itself. So you are employable. You are still having a job. You work and you grow in the organization or even within the industries itself. So from a growth mindset, is first and foremost, the discussion has been more of removing the fear and anxiety to say that it doesn't mean you don't have a job. There's this. You have, but when you have a growth mindset, when you're willing to learn, you can identify. It might not be within the organization, it can be within the industries, across the industries itself. So that's one way where organizations are now trying to create that awareness and remove the fear and anxiety from a growth mindset. On the other hand, is also from a growth mindset, it has to do with legacy thinking. There has been a lot of legacy thinking in place, and I've spoken with companies. I work with companies, and in one case, we had a discussion around a critical piece of work that can be digitized, but there was a legacy thinking behind it, and these were senior managers, senior leaders, where we talked about in terms of and we had a discussion for 45 minutes. At the end of the day, they said, no, this is a requirement, is a standard. This is how it has been in practice for centuries in the industries, and it cannot be changed. It's up. And last year, when COVID came, they had no choice, but they had to change it, and they had to go digitalization. So I went back to the leader and asked him, look, a year ago, just before the pandemic, this was the discussions we had, and we said this can be digitized, this manual process and all those things. But there was a pushback because of the legacy thinking, because this is an institution and it has to be, you cannot change because it's like, it's a sacred requirement. It has to be manual. And now because of COVID, that has been thrown away. That's been completely thrown out. And you can say, I said, that's growth mindset.
Right.
And that's forward thinking. If you have a legacy thinking and all those things, you could have prevented this last minute changes and costs and resourcing if you had made the changes at that time itself.
Right.
So sometimes when you talk about growth mindset, so these are some examples. Again, I'll come back to growth mindset and legacy thinking, forward thinking over that. But organizations are now realizing it. And I would say it's a blessing in disguise. Nobody wants to have the pandemic happen, but the pandemic has actually opened up a lot of thinking that can be broken within industries and organizations, and they realize, hey, you know what, it's not cast in stone.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it also has, I think, opened up a lot of opportunities for doing business a different way, relooking at, one of the areas you talked about was this whole relooking at the business process. And, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, because I see that as a great opportunity space. The more I converse with leaders, I see people are saying, okay, maybe we should just look at this business process very differently than we've looked at it in the past, because that, the pandemic has thrown up that opportunity. So I don't know what examples and stories or conversations you have in that space.
Yeah. So for me, one of the things I go back to organizations, when I talk to them, I say, we talk a lot about digital transformation. With the pandemic happening, digital transformation. I say it's nothing new. Digital transformation is basically business process improvement.
Yeah.
You are using digital tools and technologies to enable that.
Correct.
That's it. So you are still going through a business process improvement or business transformation or organizational transformation, just that you're using digital tools and technologies, which now is available, it's mainstream, and you're able to use that as solutioning and integrating that and improve the processes and businesses. That's it. And so that's giving you a lot more sense making and decision making and improving the business outcomes. So that's one of the things I get by. It's not a new thing, digital transformation. So I've worked with some partners and they don't use the term digital transformation. They use the term transformation digital. Right. You're transforming just using digital tools and technologies and methodologies. That's about it. It's an enabler. So that's one of the things I would always like to demystify. It's nothing new. Even if you look at the processes and all those things, it's business process improvement, organizational changes. It's up. So that's one of the key things I would like to state is, don't get too hung up on the word digital transformation.
Right. Yeah. But actually that's a good point, because I think some of the things you spoke about earlier about mindset and leaders in a way being a little bit of a role model and doing it themselves on a day-to-day behavioral kind of thing. Some of these aspects are more, the way I see it, this is just one more way of running your business and a different way of running your business or your business process. But at the end of the day, they're just tools which, if you use properly, can make you more effective and efficient. That's about it, But as we go along, I'm sure there'll be lots more digital tools and so on and so forth, which will come in and if you're up there, then you will pick up the newer tools and use them better and better and better, and that's about it, kind of thing. But yeah, you're right that maybe we should think about this as transformation using digital rather than or transformation and digital in that order rather than digital and transformation in that. So that's an interesting perspective. So Bala, let me go back to something else you mentioned, and in the context of hybrid working, but I also see that as a broader issue in removing some of the negative emotions associated with change, right? So when you look at upskilling, change, whether my job will remain or not, there's a certain degree of anxiety and fear, and the fact that what is the future going to look like in terms of and even hybrid working brings a lot of fear. There's a lot of people I talk to say, if I don't go to office, will I at some point of time my job will be quote unquote made redundant, or will I get the same promotions and increments and opportunities? And so there is a whole underlying negative tonality to it, and maybe because of like any change brings a certain degree of anxiety and negative emotions, right? But when you talk about trust, and specifically you talked about the word trust, that how organized. So do you think there are enough conversations happening around that whole area, and what are you seeing in that space? What are organizations really thinking about in that whole quote unquote trust building space? Because it's not just to do with hybrid working. I think it's a much more broader issue than that.
This is where, as HR practitioners, HR leaders, they are sandwiched in between, as always, between the management and the workforce itself. And when it comes to hybrid work, even the last days, an example I would also give you is, I've spoken to many organizations when during the lockdown, they have what they call Team A and a Team B. Where Team A goes back to the office, Team B works from home itself. After some point in time, you get the general manager talking to the HR, and if you were to come across, and they say, hey, so it seems like Team A is able to perform well in the workplace, and so what is exactly Team B doing? Yeah, so they are contributing, but I'm seeing more of Team A. So do we actually need Team B? So HR's answer was, no, they're actually still working, just that you don't get to see them. And so there is productivity within that itself. There's performance, there's outcome in there. So yes, one of the things has been the case where out of mind is out of sight is out of mind kind of mentality. And so this is one of the things they need to understand. This is where I always come and say it's performance. At the end of the day, whether you see them physically or you don't see them physically, whether they're virtual, it's the outcome. Are they contributing to the organization?
Right.
If they're contributing to the organization, then the leaders need to have the mindset change and say that, yes, it is performing, that's fine. If I don't get to see them, that's fine. There are other organizations, they take on the stand to say, hey, there has to be some social capital that still need to be built. They're not coming to the organizations, they're not part of the family, they're a bit disengaged. So this is where organizations are now trying to build that social capital, social collaboration virtually. So they want what they have in terms of, they have a virtual meets where they would have virtual events and so on. So they still bring them in the form. I would say one of the key things has been, if I'm not there, I'm not part of that organization. I'm not seeing it. So both from the leaders and also for the workforce, they see that. So this is where I would say, and again, a lot falls on HR. And this is where when I talk to my HR partners and network and so on itself, the biggest challenge has been, how do I make sure that, in a hybrid workforce, it's still seems seamless. Whether they come to office, they don't come to office itself, they still feel they are part of the organization.
Right.
They are there, belonging towards that. And again, this is where I would say digitization comes in. Given with this whole remote collaboration, we are moving towards virtual collaborations, and the way technology is advancing. So like even you and I talking, sooner or later, we might have a holographic where it feels really that, you both of us are sitting, face to face and doing that. And that excites me.
Yeah.
And it's in the near future, it will happen. So if we have a growth mindset, we would be looking at in terms of it, so regardless of how work happens, it brings that kind of a trust, the sense making, and the comradeship has to be in place itself. So bottom line, if I say trust has to be there, and thinking, the mindset of the leaders in the workforce has to say that, it's just that I'm still working, just that my workspace is my home. That's about it. And third, it's the role of the organization to enable that collaboration, that the social capital still needs to be built, regardless of where they are.
Got it. Okay, great. So Bala, as we come to the end of this conversation, I just want to ask you maybe one last question, that with the clients you're working with, and with the various leaders you work with across industry, if you were to say these are the 2-3 things which you would ask, let's say, leaders and specifically learning and HR leaders to say, over the next 12 to 24 months, pay attention to these 2 or 3 things, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
I would still come back to the first thing. I would say the welfare and the mental well-being of the workforce. So whether you're learning or you're HR itself, because I'm seeing a trend there in terms of, I think the pandemic has gone to a certain extent where the mental well-being, and so even from a learning perspective itself, why I say from a learning perspective, there's a lot of consumption of learning happening, because it's there, it's available, and especially if you're working from home, and it's easy to go to any content libraries and go and take, but this is consumption. Sometimes it can be overwhelming as well. So it does impact the mental well-being, and the anxiety causes. Why they're taking it is because they need an upskill. Because every other day they'll be watching and they'll be hearing, if I don't growth mindset, if I don't upskill myself, I'm going to be out of the race itself. So that's a tendency. So the L&D's role is to also create a safe environment for them to know, is to curate the learning in such a way to say that, hey, the learning happens because there's a need for learning. Don't just go and take learning just because, just to make sure that you have a bag full of skills and knowledge available in the event. So L&D practitioners need to create a safe environment for learning and engagement to happen itself. Second is, from an L&D perspective, would be there's a drive towards building the skill sets in terms of how do you handle mental well-being from a leader perspective. So there's a lot of things that's happening. And also critical thinking. So there's some adaptable skills that's building. So L&D needs to look in terms of it. The third one would be more from a digital literacy standpoint. Is there is a big divide in terms of digital literacy, readiness of the workforce to use digital tools and technologies, not only for learning, but also in the workplace itself. And that has to be accelerated. But specifically, I've come across organizations where I felt, I see L&Ds, they themselves are not ready. So one of the things I would tell L&D practitioners, and this I've been telling them, is that, well, and I think as HR practitioners, we always have this issue, right? So we help build and equip the organizations, but when it comes to HR, we ourselves, find it hard, or we don't have the time to do that. So one of the key things I would say, you need to build a digital literacy within the self, within the HR community and L&D community itself. You need to know what's actually happening before you can then take it to the organization. The last one I would say is the role of an L&D. See yourself as a learning architect. It's given where things are, you just need to create that ecosystem. That's about it. You don't need to have all the answers. You need to know how to curate and get the answers and be an architect to enable that within the organization. So that's four.
That's great. That's great advice, Bala. And clearly, I think as with your experience across Asia and working with different industry leaders, I think that this is very useful for our listeners and viewers who watch these shorts. But one last question, which is a personal question, and so what have your learning areas, in terms of what have been your focus areas, saying I want to learn these two things in the next, let's say, 6 months or 12 months or whatever it is, have you picked up 2 or 3 very specific areas to learn?
Yeah. So I mean, again, Bimal, I'm a technology guy, through and through technology guy itself, and so in the area of mixed reality, so immersive technology itself, you will see, especially when you talk about hybrid workplace. One of the technology that enables hybrid workplace to be more engaging and more collaborative is in the area of immersive technology that's using augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality solutions. And so that's one area that I am driving, as well as I'm trying to develop myself in terms of how do you make it easy for a workforce to utilize those technologies. I mean, even though it's personally for me to understand more about it, where the technology is moving, so that I can take that and enable that within the organizations. So I see that the future. I see that as the future in terms of the whole employee experience, moving towards using immersive technology in the forefront. And personally, that's an area that I'm trying to gain more knowledge and understanding on. And to be frank, it's evolving day by day. There's a lot more technologies and everything that's coming out, which is, I'm trying to keep abreast with that itself. That's always a challenge to do that. So that's you can see that always gives me a sparkle in my eye whenever I talk about immersive technology.
Comment on that. That's certainly your facial change when you start talking about that. So I can see the excitement building up. But Bala, thank you for your time and this conversation. It's been a great conversation, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners will sort of love this, and hopefully they'll get a few more ideas to sort of start exploring in their own HR or their organizations and in their L&D space and so on and so forth. So again, thank you very much for this conversation, and for those of you who are listening in or viewing this shorts video, feel free to sort of feed us back. One, how did you like this conversation? But more important, what else would you like us to talk about and pick our brains on, kind of a thing in a way. Thank you again, Bala, and thank you again to the listeners.
Thanks, Bimal. Thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure.